A black belt mocked the tiny Japanese rookie in front of his entire class. Seconds later, one move from her ended his career for good. "Take your hands off my mother." The words came not from Keiko, the cleaner kneeling on the mat with a spilled bucket spreading around her, but from her 13-year-old daughter, Hana, standing in the doorway of the academy with her school backpack still hanging off one shoulder.
You don't belong here.
Marcus Boone, the black belt and owner who had moments earlier shoved Keiko aside in front of his students,
You think you can
turned
challenge
with
me?
a slow, amused smile. "What was that, little girl? You hurt me."
Try me.
Apologized to her. The room went silent. The students who had been laughing froze where they stood. A child barely tall enough to reach the man's chest had just challenged an instructor who believed himself untouchable. What happened next would leave the entire academy frozen in disbelief.
I'm ready.
This is the story of how a quiet girl carrying a warm black belt and an old promise changed everything in the span of a single breath. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now, let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A quiet girl's promise to her grandfather was about to be broken. For years, her family's secret had been kept safe, folded away like the faded belt at the bottom of her bag. But tonight, in front of a crowd of strangers, that secret would be unwrapped and used to defend the one person she had left. The scent of clean sweat and lemon floor polish filled the Apex Combat Academy. It was a place of discipline, a temple built to the worship of strength. On the far wall, framed photographs of grinning tournament winners stared down with hard, certain eyes. Below them, a long shelf of brass trophies gleamed under harsh fluorescent light, polished every evening until they threw back the room in miniature. The hush of a late weeknight was usually a comfort to Keiko Tanaka. At 46, Keiko moved with a quiet economy that made her nearly invisible. For the past 8 months, she had been the academy's cleaner, the woman who arrived as the final class wound down, her gray uniform melting into the corners and shadows. She would wait, patient and unhurried, for the last student to gather his gear and leave before she began her work, turning the space from a theater of grunts and impact back into something pristine and silent. She took pride in that work. The mats had never been so spotless, the mirrors never so free of fingerprints and fog. The trophies along the wall caught the light like small fires. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus had kept a handful of his senior students late for an extra session, and the air in the room was already wrong. Keiko has seen it before. When Marcus was in this kind of mood, the dojo stopped being a place of learning and became a stage for one man's need to feel large. She kept to the shadows along the far wall and watched, the way she always watched, invisible and silent. A boy of about 16 named Tyler was on the mat, sweating through a kata he had nearly mastered, and Marcus was circling him like a shark that had smelled blood. The boy's foot landed an inch out of position on a turn, and that inch was all Marcus needed. "Stop," Marcus said. He didn't shout. He never had to. "Everybody look. Look at this." He grabbed the boy's shoulders and turned him toward the others. 3 years have poured into this one, and he still moves like he's got his feet in a bucket. You want to know why you'll never compete? You want to know why you'll always be a white belt with a black belt's ego? Because you don't listen. He shoved the boy lightly, just enough to make him stagger. "Run the form again. And this time pretend you're not a complete embarrassment to my school." Tyler ran it again, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy with the particular shame of a kid being broken down in front of his peers. The other students watched the floor. Daniel, the eldest among them, watched Marcus with a flat, unreadable expression, his fists loose at his sides, saying nothing, because saying something was a luxury students at Apex had learned they could not afford. This was how Marcus built his kingdom. Not through respect, through fear, doled out in small daily humiliations, so that every person in the room was always just a little afraid of being the next one held up as the example. It was a pattern, and Keiko had cleaned around the edges of it for 8 months. She should have waited until they were gone, She knew that. But it was late. Her knees ached. The last bus left in 40 minutes, and she let herself believe she could get a head start on the spilled corner of the mat without being noticed. She had made the smallest of mistakes. She had carried her mop bucket across the edge of the tatami 1 minute too soon. It was nothing. A wet wheel, a slick of polish, a half step she misjudged in shoes worn thin at the heel. The bucket tipped. Soapy water fanned across the corner of the tatami in a slow gray tongue, and Keiko dropped to her knees at once, towel in hand, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Marcus Boone did not see an accident. He saw an audience. He was a big man, broad through the chest and shoulders. His black belt nodded with the precise showy symmetry of someone who spent more time admiring the knot than earning it. He had built Apex from a leaking storefront into the most talked about academy in the county, and somewhere along the way he had decided that the building, the mats, the trophies, and everyone who breathed inside them belonged to him. He crossed the floor in 3 unhurried strides and stood over the kneeling woman, letting the silence stretch until his students felt it crawl up their spines. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for the back row. 8 months and she still hasn't learned which side of the line to stay on. A few of the students laughed, because they had learned that not laughing was its own kind of risk. "You don't belong on the mat," Marcus went on, planting the toe of his bare foot against the rim of her bucket and tipping the last of the water out in a thin, deliberate stream. "You belong behind it, cleaning up after people who actually matter." Keiko did not look up. She had learned long ago that the fastest way through a man like this was to make herself smaller, to absorb it, to let it pass over her like weather. She mopped at the spill with her shoulders rounded and her eyes fixed on the floor. That was when Marcus reached down, gripped her by the upper arm, and hauled her aside, not gently, to clear his precious mat. And that was when the door opened. Hana Tanaka had come to walk her mother home, the way she did most nights. She was small for 13, slight in the shoulders, swimming a little inside a faded blue sweatshirt with the cuffs pushed up. A school backpack hung off one shoulder. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose knot, a few strands fallen across her face. She looked, in every possible way, like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. She did not raise her voice. She did not move quickly. She simply stood in the doorway and watched a grown man with a black belt put his hand on her mother, and something behind her quiet eyes went very, very still. "Take your hands off my mother." Marcus turned. His students turned. For a long moment, the only sound was water dripping from the lip of the bucket onto the mat. Until now, Hannah had been nobody. Just the small girl who waited by the door at closing time, the cleaner's daughter, beneath everyone's notice. Marcus had spent 8 months not learning her name. But what no one in that room knew, what no one could have guessed, was that the quiet child in the doorway had been raised by one of the most dangerous men ever to wear a uniform, and that she had spent half her life learning to never ever let anyone see it. Marcus let go of Keiko's arm and laughed, a big performing laugh meant to bring his students back to his side. "And who is this?" he said, spreading his hands. "Did the cleaning lady bring backup?" "Hannah," Keiko breathed, scrambling to her feet. "Hannah, it's all right." "Go wait outside, please." But Hannah didn't move. She kept her eyes on the man. "You hurt her," the girl said. It wasn't a question. "Apologize." The students glanced at one another. One of them, a tall, watchful young man of 18 named Daniel, had stopped pretending to stretch and was staring at the girl with an expression no one else wore, not amusement, but something closer to careful attention. He had noticed the way she stood, weight balanced evenly over both feet, hands loose and open at her sides, shoulders dropped, not raised. He had read about stances like that. He had never seen one stand still in a doorway and feel like a loaded thing. Marcus, who noticed none of this, walked toward the girl with the swagger of a man approaching a joke he was about to land. "Apologize," he repeated, savoring it. "You want me to apologize? Tell you what." He crouched down, hands on his knees, bringing his grinning face level with hers. How about a lesson instead? You step on my mat, little girl, you take off those shoes, and we'll see if your mommy raised a fighter or a mouth. Behind him, a couple of students chuckled. The sound was thin. Marcus, come on, Daniel said quietly. She's a kid. She started it, Marcus said without looking back. He stayed crouched, eyes locked on Hannah, certain he was about to watch her cry or run, or do the thing children do when the world gets too big for them. Hannah looked past him, just once, at her mother. Keiko's face had gone the color of old paper. There was a particular kind of shame in it that Hannah had spent her whole short life watching settle over her mother's features. The shame of being made small in front of strangers, the shame of having no one to stand between her and the world. Something in the girl decided. She slipped the backpack off her shoulder and set it down by the wall, slowly the way you'd set down something fragile. Then she crouched and unzipped the front pocket, and her fingers found what they always found there, what they had touched 1,000 times for comfort. A strip of cotton fabric, dyed black once, faded now to a soft charcoal gray, frayed at both ends and worn thin at the center where it had been tied and untied across decades. Her grandfather's belt. She didn't take it out. She just rested her thumb against the frayed edge for the length of one slow breath, the way she always did before anything that mattered. Then she zipped the bag, stood, and stepped out of her sneakers. Okay, she said. The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. Marcus stood and clapped his hands together, delighted. You heard her, he announced to his students. She wants the lesson. Clear the center. Hannah stepped onto the mat. The tatami was firm and cool under her bare feet, faintly tacky where her mother's spill hadn't fully dried. She felt the texture of it through her solace and let it ground her. Her heart was steady. That was the thing her grandfather had drilled into her past the point of thought. The heart of a frightened person races. The heart of a trained one waits. But before the first blow was struck, before Marcus took his showy fighting stance, Hannah's mind slipped backward, the way it always did at the edge of something she had promised never to do. She was 9 years old again, and the sun was warm on the back of her neck. It was her grandfather's small backyard, the grass worn bare in a circle from years of bare feet turning on it. Ojizen stood across from her in a plain white GI gone soft and yellow with washing, the same faded black belt around his waist. He was old by then, his hair fully white, his hands knotted at the knuckles. But when he moved, he was water, and she was a child trying to catch it in her fingers. Again, he had said, not unkindly, after she'd ended up flat on her back in the grass for the dozenth time. He reached down and pulled her up by the wrist with a strength that always surprised her. You are still fighting me. Don't fight me. Read me. The body always tells you what it will do, one heartbeat before it does it. Learn to listen, and you will never need to be the stronger one. She had rubbed her elbow and scowled. Why do I even have to learn this? I'm small. Everybody's bigger than me. He had crouched then and taken her small hands in his old ones, and his eyes had gone serious in the way that meant she should remember what came next for the rest of her life. Because the small ones are the only ones who learn to truly see, he said. And because of this, he tapped the warm belt at his waist. What I'm teaching you is not for tournaments. It is not for trophies on a wall. It is not for pride. A person who uses this to feel big has already lost. You will use it for one thing only, Hannah. To stand in front of someone who cannot stand for themselves. Promise me. You touch this belt, you make the promise, and you keep it for as long as you live. She had pressed her thumb against the frayed edge of the belt, the way she would press it 10,000 times after, and she had promised. He had been gone for 3 years now, and she had kept that promise every single day, through every shove in a school hallway, every cruel word, every time a bigger kid decided a small quiet girl was an easy target. She had walked away. She had let them think they'd won, because walking away was its own kind of strength, And because a promise to a dead man is the heaviest thing a child can carry. But Ojizun has said one thing more clearly than anything else. To stand in front of someone who cannot stand for themselves. And there was her mother against the wall made small. Hannah opened her eyes. She was 13 again, on a stranger's mat. And a black belt 3 times her size was bouncing on the balls of his feet in front of her, mugging for his students. Don't worry, Marcus called over his shoulder to Keiko. I'll go easy. I only need to make a point. Please, Keiko said, her voice cracking.
Fluke.
Please, she's only a child. Then she should have stayed home, Marcus said, and snapped a front kick toward Hannah's midsection. It was a good kick by his standards, fast with a sharp exhale behind it, the kind he'd used to fold 100 amateurs in half. His students had seen it land enough times to wince in anticipation. But the kick never landed. Just as his foot was about to connect, Hannah shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, a half pivot at the hip, a slight sway of the torso, no more than the width of a hand. The kick whistled past her stomach close enough that she felt the wind of it brush the fabric of her sweatshirt. She had not blocked it. She had not even seemed to hurry. She had simply not been where the kick expected her to be. Marcus stumbled forward a step, off balance, his momentum carrying him past her into empty air. A ripple went through the watching students. One of them made a small involuntary sound. Daniel's mouth had fallen slightly open. Marcus recovered, his grin slipping just a little at the corners. Lucky, he muttered. He tried again at once, unwilling to let the moment breathe. A roundhouse kick this time, his shin swinging in a high arc toward her temple. Fast enough that 2 of the students flinched on her behalf. Hannah dropped beneath it by bending her knees a few inches, the kick passing harmlessly over the loose knot of her hair. And she was standing tall again before his foot had even returned to the floor. She had not lunged. She had not panicked. She had measured the height of the kick in the instant it began and made herself exactly small enough, and not 1 inch smaller. A young woman near the wall whispered something to the boy beside her. The boy shook his head slowly, as if to say he didn't understand it either. Stand still, Marcus growled. You want me to stand still so you can hit me, Hannah said. That isn't fighting. That's asking permission to win. He squared up again and threw a combination this time. A jab, a cross, then a heavier hook aimed to clip the side of her head. 3 strikes meant to overwhelm. Hannah moved through them like she was strolling between raindrops. A sway of the head took her under the jab. A small turn of the shoulder let the cross slide past her cheek with inches to spare. And when the big looping hook came around, she simply tilted back at the waist, bending out of its arc, then settled upright again, breathing easily, hands still loose at her sides. She hadn't thrown a single strike of her own. Your movements are too wide, she said, her voice quiet and clear in the dead silent room. You telegraph everything with your shoulders. I knew the hook was coming before you did. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. Before, it had been the silence of people waiting to laugh. Now it was the silence of people beginning to understand they had been wrong about what they were watching. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Until now, Hannah had been just the invisible daughter of the cleaner. Marcus, the black belt and owner of the proudest academy in the county, had challenged her as a joke. But what none of them knew was that this quiet girl had been raised by a man who had spent 20 years learning to end fights before they began. And now, in the center of the mat, surrounded by the wreckage of everyone's expectations, she was about to show them exactly what that meant. Marcus's face had gone dark red. He came again, faster, a low kick to sweep her legs followed by a hooking elbow meant to catch her as she stumbled. But she didn't stumble. She lifted her lead foot a fraction of a second before the sweep arrived, let it pass under her like a wave under a gull, and turned her head so the elbow whistled past her ear. She had read both strikes in the set of his hips before they began. You decide everything before you move, she said, not even breathing hard. Your weight commits first. A child could see it coming. My grandfather could have seen it with his eyes closed. The word grandfather did something strange to the room. Daniel, standing at the edge of the mat, felt the hair lift on his arms. He had read about this, really read about it, in the dusty histories he loved. The accounts of old masters who taught that the highest art was to never be where the blow landed, to let an opponent defeat himself on the empty air. He had always half believed those stories were polished by time into legend. He was not half believing anymore. He was watching it happen in a strip mall dojo on a Tuesday night, performed by a 13-year-old girl in a faded sweatshirt. Somewhere in his chest, beneath the ego and the showmanship, a small cold voice was telling Marcus to stop, to laugh it off, to send the cleaning lady and her strange daughter home and never speak of this again. But he was a man who had built his whole self on never being beaten in his own house. And there were a dozen young people watching, and that was a thing he could not survive losing in front of. So he stopped performing and started trying. The next attack was real. He came in hard, a flurry of strikes with his full weight behind him, no more playing to the crowd. Punch, punch, kick, a clumsy grab for her wrist, and Hannah flowed backward and around all of it, never blocking force with force, only redirecting, only being elsewhere. The harder he tried, the wilder he got, his breath tearing out of him in ragged bursts, sweat flying off his brow in the harsh light. His kai, once a confident bark, now came out as something between a grunt and a snarl. Daniel had stopped breathing somewhere in the last 10 seconds. Everything he'd ever studied told him that what he was watching could not be faked, could not be choreographed, could not be the lucky accident of a brave child. The way she conserved every motion, the way she turned a man's strength into the very thing that wore him out. That was a lifetime of training, distilled into a body that hadn't finished growing. He didn't know yet where she learned it, but he knew, the way you know a true thing in your gut before your mind catches up, that he was looking at the real article in a building full of fakes. The mother stood frozen against the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth. She knew what her daughter could do. She had begged her for 3 years to never have to do it. Marcus, half blind with fury and humiliation, threw everything he had left into one last attack, a wild, looping overhand strike with all his weight behind it, the kind of blow that comes from a man who has stopped thinking and started swinging. It was the punch of someone who no longer cared about winning cleanly, who only wanted to feel his fist connect with the small thing that had made a fool of him. A few of the students cried out. Keiko's hand flew to her mouth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and for one suspended instant the whole room seemed to hold a single breath, certain they were about to watch a grown man's full strength land on a child. And this time, for the first time, Hannah did not step back. She stepped in. She moved inside the arc of his descending arm before it could gather its full force, slipping toward him rather than away, the one direction no one ever expects. Her left hand shot up, open-palmed, and met his forearm at the wrist, redirecting the heavy strike harmlessly past her shoulder so that his own momentum carried him forward and spun him slightly off his line. At the exact same instant, her right hand moved. It was a blur, a short, compact thrust traveling no more than a few inches, generated not from her shoulder but from a sudden, whip-like turn of her hips and the raw power of the ground pushing up through her bare feet. Every ounce of her small frame poured itself into that one short distance. She did not aim for his face. She did not aim for his chest. She drove the heel of her palm into a single precise point just below his ribs, the solar plexus, the soft hollow where the great nerve cluster sits, with her whole body behind it, exactly where her grandfather had shown her on a slow summer afternoon, exactly hard enough and not 1 ounce harder. The strike landed with a sound that was not loud. It was sharp and final, like a dry branch snapping in the cold. Marcus froze. His entire body went rigid. The fury drained out of his face in an instant, replaced by a wide-eyed animal confusion. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He could not move. He could not breathe. The strike had hit the cluster of nerves beneath his breastbone with surgical exactness, and his diaphragm had simply locked. His lungs refusing to obey him, the world narrowing to one terrifying point of nothing. Hannah stepped back, calm, and let her hands fall again to her sides. Marcus dropped to his knees on the mat he owned, in front of the students who feared him, gasping like a fish on a dock, both hands clutched to his middle. A long, thin line of spit hung from his open mouth. The great Marcus Boone, undefeated owner of Apex Combat Academy, knelt on his own tatami and could not draw a single breath. No one laughed now. No one moved. Hannah looked at the kneeling man without triumph, without cruelty, with something almost like sadness. Then she looked slowly around the ring of pale, stunned faces. Does anyone else want a lesson? The question fell into the silence and lay there. Not one student met her eyes. She walked to the wall, slid her sneakers back on, and picked up her backpack. She held it for a moment against her chest, feeling the soft shape of the folded belt inside, and she thought, with a sinking in her stomach, I broke it. I broke the promise. Then she crossed to her mother, took her trembling hand, and led her out into the cold night air, leaving the door swinging open behind them on a room full of people who would never see the world quite the same way again. If you have ever watched someone you love be made small and felt that quiet, dangerous thing turn over inside you, then you already understand exactly what Hannah felt walking out that door. She had won. And somehow, in a way she couldn't put words to yet, she knew that winning had only just begun the real fight. The thing about humiliating a man in front of everyone he rules over is that he does not heal from it. He festers. For the first few days, the Tanakas thought it was over. Word of what happened spread through the academy fast, too fast for Marcus's liking. By the weekend, 3 of his senior students had quietly stopped showing up. By the next week, 2 families had pulled their kids from the youth program after their children came home repeating a strange story about a tiny girl who beat the sensei without throwing a punch. Apex has survived 8 years on one thing: the unshakable image of Marcus Boone as the strongest man in any room. Hannah had cracked that image down the middle in 30 seconds, and Marcus knew it. A smaller man might have learned something. Marcus chose revenge. He could not beat the girl. He understood that much in his bones now, in the deep bruise of nerves under his ribs that ached for a week. But the girl had a mother. A poor, invisible immigrant mother who scrubbed floors for a living. And a poor woman is the easiest kind of person in the world to ruin. It began with phone calls.
Keep it close.
Keiko claimed for 3 businesses besides the academy: a dental office on 4th Street, a small accounting firm, and the home of an elderly couple across town. Within 2 weeks, she lost 2 of them. The dentist was apologetic and vague. There had been a complaint, something about concerns. He couldn't really say more. The accountant didn't even bother being kind. He simply told her not to come back, and when she pressed him, he muttered something about hearing she caused a scene and wasn't the kind of person they wanted in the office. Keiko didn't understand. She had never caused a scene in her life. She had spent her whole life making sure of it. Hannah understood at once. She started noticing the car. A dark sedan that wasn't there before, idling at the end of their street in the evenings. Parked outside the laundromat where her mother dropped off the wash on Tuesdays. Following 2 cars back when they walked home from the bus stop. She never saw the driver's face clearly, but she didn't have to. She knew the broad shape of those shoulders. Then came the worst of it. Their landlord, a tired man named Mr. Petrikis who'd never given them trouble in 3 years, knocked on their door one rainy evening with an envelope and an apology that wouldn't meet their eyes. Someone had been telling people things. That the Tanakas were trouble. That the girl was violent and dangerous.
I don't know
that
what
there
to
had
do
been
about
an
my mother.
incident.
We have
Petition
nowhere to
had
go.
started in the building. Mr. Petrikis didn't believe it. He said he really didn't, but the other tenants were frightened. And he had a business to run, and they had until the end of the month. The envelope was an eviction notice. But Marcus wasn't finished, because men like him never are until something stops them. The rumor he had seeded now had a life of its own. and it crept into the one place Hannah had thought was safe. At school, a counselor pulled her out of class. There had been reports, the woman said carefully, that Hannah had been involved in a violent altercation with an adult, and that some parents had expressed concern about her being around younger children. Hannah sat in a small office and understood that Marcus had been busy, that he had learned the names of the people who held power over a 13-year-old's life and had whispered into every one of their ears. She said nothing in her own defense. There was nothing she could prove yet. She walked back to class with the whole hallway watching her like she was something that might go off. 2 days later, he came in person. She and her mother were walking home from the market in the early dark, a bag of groceries between them, when the dark sedan slid up to the curb and Marcus rolled down the window. He didn't get out. He just leaned across, that easy smile back on his face, and spoke in a low, friendly voice that was somehow worse than shouting. "How's the apartment hunt going?" He said, "I hear it's hard to find a place when no one wants to rent to you. Funny how word gets around." He let his eyes move from Keiko's frightened face to Hannah's still one. "You should have stayed outside that night, little girl. You had a quiet little life. Now look at it." He tapped the steering wheel. "I've got nothing but time. And I've got friends. You've got a mop bucket and a bad attitude. Let me know how that works out." The window slid up. The car pulled away. Keiko's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the groceries. Hannah stood very still on the sidewalk, watching the red taillights shrink, and felt the old, calm coldness gather behind her eyes, the one her grandfather had taught her to control. It would have taken her 4 seconds to stop that car. She let it go, not because she was afraid, because she finally understood that her hands were the one weapon Marcus actually wanted her to use, the one that would let him play the victim, and she was not going to give it to him. "He wants me angry," she said quietly. "He wants me to do something he can show people. So I won't." Back in the apartment, Keiko sat at their small kitchen table, the eviction notice flat in front of her, and did not cry, because she had long ago run out of the luxury of crying. She just stared at the paper as if she could change the words by reading them enough times. Hannah stood in the kitchen doorway and felt the guilt close over her head like cold water. "This is my fault," she said. "Don't," her mother said, without looking up. "I broke my promise, Mom. Ojizan told me. He told me I could only ever use it to protect someone. And I thought I was protecting you, but look what it did. I made everything worse. If I had just stayed outside like you told me, you'd still have your jobs. We'd still have our home." Her voice, which never broke, was breaking now. "I should have walked away. He just wanted to embarrass you. We could have survived being embarrassed. We can't survive this." Keiko finally looked up. There were 100 things she wanted to say, and she had words for none of them. So she just reached out and took her daughter's small hand, the one that had ended a fight without starting one, and held it. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark with her grandfather's belt unwrapped across her chest, running her thumb along the frayed edge again and again, and she let herself remember the whole truth of the man who had given it to her. The truth her mother had only told her in pieces the night of his funeral. His name had been Tatsuo Tanaka. To the neighbors, to the world, he had been a quiet, gentle old man, a retired locksmith who tended a small garden and never raised his voice. The kind of man you'd help across the street. The kind of man whose name you'd forget. But before all of that, decades before, he had been Sergeant Tatsuo Tanaka, a member of one of the most secretive and rigorously trained special units in his country's defense forces. He had spent 20 years in places he never named, doing work he never described, mastering a discipline of combat that had nothing to do with sport or trophies and everything to do with the terrible economy of survival. He had been taught, and had taught others, that the truest skill was not the ability to destroy. It was the ability to end a threat with the least possible force, to control a situation so completely that violence became almost an afterthought. The masters he trained under had a saying he repeated to Hana more than any other. The strong man strikes. The master makes the strike unnecessary.
Officers, I'm
When he
Detective Reyes.
finally left
I need
that
to ask you
world,
both some
he left
questions.
all of it
What
behind.
about?
The rank,
Come in.
the medals, the stories.
You
He
found
came
the
home
truth.
and locked the door on it the way he could
I
lock
appreciate
any
your
door.
patience.
And he became the gentle old gardener whose granddaughter
didn't
thought of
mean
him
to, I swear.
only as the man who pulled her up out of the grass and
Put your
told
hands
her to
behind your
read
back.
her opponent's heartbeat.
No, please, I
He
didn't.
taught her everything,
No.
and he made her swear to use none of
No,
it,
you're wrong.
except in the one circumstance that
still-
justified everything he had ever learned: to stand between the
saw
cruel
everything
and the
that happened.
helpless.
was
Lying in the
defending
dark,
himself.
Hannah finally understood the second
need to
half
know
of
the
his
truth
lesson,
now.
the half she had been
The truth
too
must
young
be
to
heard, no
hear.
matter how difficult.
He had not given
What
her
exactly
his
did you
skill
see
to
that
keep
night?
her from ever
Everything.
using it.
And now,
He had given
I'm
it
ready
to
tell the
her
world.
so that on the night someone hurt her mother, she would have a choice, and he had trusted her all the way from the grave to make the right one. She had made the right one. She was sure of that now. But making the right choice and surviving its consequences were two different things. Marcus had money, time, and a reputation to weaponize. The Tanakas had a freight belt and an eviction notice. And in the world, as it actually worked, Hannah knew the freight belt usually lost. Unless she fought the way her grandfather had really taught her to fight, not with her hands, with her head. Until now, Hannah had won the only kind of fight the world expected of someone like her, a fight with fists, on a mat, settled in 30 seconds. Marcus had lost that one and then changed the rules, taking the battle to the place where the poor and the quiet almost always lose, the world of rumor, money, and reputation. But what he did not understand was that the grandfather who taught Hannah to read a body had also taught her to read a man, and that the same patience that let her stand still inside a storm of punches could let her stand still and watch a liar dig his own grave. And now, with an eviction notice on the table and her mother's name being dragged through the mud, that patience was about to become the most dangerous weapon of all. She needed a witness. She needed proof. And she needed someone the
Thank you
rest
for
of the
everything.
town would believe over her. She knew exactly who.
We're together
Daniel
now.
Reyes hadn't
Don't
gone
worry.
back to Apex since the night of the fight. He thought about it more than he wanted to admit, the impossible, beautiful economy of the way the girl had moved, the way she dismantled a bully without ever raising her hand in anger. So when she found him outside the community college library on a gray afternoon, sitting on the steps with a textbook he wasn't reading, he wasn't entirely surprised. "You're her," he said.
I'm so incredibly
"The one
proud
from
of
the
you.
academy.
You're a true shield.
My mother is going to be evicted,"
Thank you. I
Hannah
appreciate
said,
that so
sitting down
much.
beside him without ceremony. "Because of Marcus. He's been calling her employers and following us and telling people I'm dangerous. He's trying to drive us out of town. I can't stop him by fighting him." She paused. "But you study this, the history of it. You know what he is." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "He's a fraud who hits people who can't hit back," he said finally.
Good
"He
morning.
always was.
Please,
I
come
just didn't have a reason to
Thank you
say it
very
out
much.
loud before." He turned to look at her. "What do
Keep
you
your back
need?"
straight.
"Evidence,"
Breathe.
Hannah said. "He thinks no one's
Okay.
watching him. We
Good.
make
Now
sure
try
someone
to
is."
match me.
Before we go
Keep
any
your
further,
balance.
I want to pause here
Redirect,
for
don't
just a
strike.
second.
Follow through
Whenever I
gently.
share one of these stories,
Ready?
I hope it gives you a chance
Good,
to
try
step
again.
out of the everyday
That's right.
and just drift for a
Shoulders
bit.
back.
I'd love to
Chin
know what you
up.
were doing while listening, maybe relaxing
Perfect.
after a long
Very
shift,
good.
on a
Keep
late
your
night
promise to
drive,
the end.
or just winding down before bed. Drop
To
a
the
line
very
in the
end.
comments. I really do read them all. And I'm curious, if
This
you
is
were in
where your
Hannah's
dad
place,
touched it most.
watching someone
Was he
twist the
sad?
truth to destroy
No,
your
honey,
family,
he was
would you have
happy.
fought back or walked away? Let me know. Now, let's get back to it. What followed were the longest 2 weeks of Hannah's life, and the most
The time
patient.
has come.
Daniel
to
had a
take up the
decent
mantle.
camera and an unshakable willingness to
We
sit
must
still in
protect
cold
them.
cars. Night after
Look at
night,
them.
while Hannah watched from her own window with her grandfather's
so
belt
far.
wound around one fist,
made it.
Daniel parked where he could see the street, and he waited. He learned the rhythm of Marcus's obsession the way a hunter learns the trails of his quarry. The man came most evenings, always alone, always certain that no one small enough to be his victim could ever be watching him back. And Marcus, arrogant to the marrow, gave them everything. There he was, on a Tuesday, standing in the rain across from the Taneka's building, photographing their door on his phone like a man collecting trophies. There he was on a Wednesday, parked outside Hannah's school at dismissal, watching the children pour out, watching her. There he was on a Thursday, leaning into the window of the dental office on 4th Street, gesturing, the dentist nodding nervously. The conversation Daniel couldn't hear but could read in every guilty line of the man's posture. There he was outside the laundromat on Tuesday again, following Keiko at a careful distance down the dark sidewalk, his face caught clear and unmistakable as he passed beneath a streetlight, his breath fogging in the cold. Daniel logged every date and time in a spiral notebook, careful as an accountant, building a record one frozen night at a time. He photographed the dark sedan's license plate. He noted which businesses Marcus visited and on which days each of Keiko's jobs evaporated, until the pattern was as plain as a confession. And on the final night, through the steamed-up window of a coffee shop, he captured the prize, Marcus holding court before a small audience of acquaintances, gesturing grandly, telling them with a wounded, self-righteous face that the Tanaka girl had attacked him unprovoked, that he was this close to pressing charges, that he was honestly afraid for the safety of his students. The lie, laid out in full, in his own voice, for anyone with eyes and ears. The rumor has spread the way rumors do. An instigator, Marcus himself, whispering into the right ears. Amplifiers, the gossiping students, the frightened neighbors, the petition passed door to door. And it had nearly reached the only stage that mattered. The stage where an authority believed it and acted. The landlord, and very nearly the police, who Marcus had hinted he might call. So Hannah decided to let the rumor reach its authority on her terms. There was a community forum the whole town used, the place where people posted about lost dogs and yard sales and which contractor not to hire. Hannah, with Daniel beside her, wrote a single careful post. It did not accuse Marcus of anything. It simply asked, with wide-eyed innocence, whether anyone else had had a bad experience at Apex Combat Academy because her family had heard some concerning things and was thinking of enrolling. She signed it under a name that wasn't hers. It was bait, and Marcus took it like a fish takes a hook. He could not stand to let his academy be questioned in public. Within an hour he was in the comments under his real name, indignant, defending his reputation, and unable to help himself, repeating the lie. He wrote that the only incident at his academy had involved an unstable young girl who had violently attacked him without any provocation whatsoever while he was simply teaching a class, and that he had witnesses and was considering legal action. He wrote it for the whole town to read. That was the moment Daniel posted the video. He had edited it simply, with no music and no commentary, because the truth did not need any. It opened with Marcus's own words from the coffee shop, clear and arrogant, the unprovoked attack, the helpless instructor, the threat of charges. And then it cut, plainly and without mercy, to 2 weeks of evidence. Marcus photographing the family's door, Marcus following a small woman through the dark, Marcus leaning into the windows of her employer's businesses, the lie of a complaint forming on his lips. Timestamps, streetlights, his unmistakable face, again and again. There was no provocation in the footage. There was only a grown man with a black belt stalking a cleaner and her child. The town did the rest. By morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times. By evening, thousands. The former students who had drifted away from Apex came forward now with their own stories. The casual cruelties, the public humiliations, the way he'd built a kingdom on fear. The dentist and the accountant, mortified to learn they'd been manipulated into firing an innocent woman over a stalker's lies, called Keiko to apologize and to beg her to come back. Mr. Petricus tore up the eviction notice himself and stood in front of the other tenants and told them the truth, and the petition died on the spot. And then the authorities, the real ones, finally stepped in, not the ones Marcus had tried to weaponize, but the ones he should have feared. A detective who had seen the footage came to the Tanaka's door, this time with questions for them, and a great many more for Marcus Boone. There are laws about following people. There are laws about harassment, about stalking a child and her mother through the streets at night. The very evidence Marcus had thought made him untouchable was now a meticulously documented case against him. Daniel, who had spent years swallowing what he saw, found his voice at last. He stood up in front of the town, in the comments, and then in person, to the detective, and then to the local reporter who came sniffing around the story, and he told the truth about Apex, about the small daily cruelties, about a man who needed to make others feel weak because it was the only way he knew to feel strong. The silent witness had become the loudest one of all. He did not go to prison. The case settled into restraining orders and fines and the quiet machinery of the law, but his career was finished as surely as if she had struck him. No parent in that town would put a child in his care again. The trophies came down off the wall. Within 2 months, the doors of Apex Combat Academy were chained shut. A faded for-lease sign taped crookedly in the window where the champions used to grin. There was a single moment, the morning he left, that Hannah would think about for a long time afterward. She happened to be at the bus stop when his packed car idled at the light, and for one heartbeat their eyes met through the glass. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a tired, frightened, ordinary man who had built his entire self on a single fragile idea that he was the strongest in the room, and who had nothing at all underneath it once that idea broke. She felt no triumph looking at him. She felt something closer to pity. The kind her grandfather had warned her was the most dangerous feeling of all, because it could so easily curdle into mercy for people who had not earned it. The light changed. Marcus Boone drove away, and no one watched him go, and no one missed him. He had wanted, more than anything, to never be beaten in his own house. In the end, he lost the house, the students, the reputation, and the town. The tiny rookie he had mocked for a laugh had not just ended his career. She had ended the lie he had built his whole life on top of, and she had done it without ever raising her hand a second time. But this story was never really about Marcus. A few weeks after it was all over, on a quiet Sunday, Hannah sat with her mother at their kitchen table in the apartment that was theirs again, in the town that was theirs again. The belt lay between them, unwrapped, frayed and soft and gray with age. "I keep thinking about him," Hannah said. "Oh, Jason. I keep thinking I let him down. I made a promise to only use it to protect someone, and I did protect you, but then everything got so much worse, and people got hurt, and I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if he'd be proud or ashamed of me." Keiko was quiet for a while. Then she reached across the table and laid her hand over the warm belt, over her daughter's hand resting on it. "When that man put his hands on me," she said slowly, "and I was on the floor and everyone was laughing, do you know what I felt? I felt like I had felt my whole life, invisible, like I was nothing. Like there was no one in the entire world who would ever stand between me and someone like him." She turned her hand over and folded her fingers around Hannah's. "And then you walked through that door, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I wasn't alone. But the eviction, you didn't break your promise, Hannah." Her mother's voice was firm now, and her eyes were wet and steady. "You kept it. Your grandfather didn't make you swear to keep me safe from every bad thing in the world. He couldn't. No one can. He made you swear to stand in front of people who can't stand for themselves." She pressed her daughter's hand against the belt. "You were protecting me. You were being a shield. Everything that man did afterward, that was his cruelty, not your mistake. A shield isn't to blame for the sword." Hannah looked down at the belt, at the frayed edge worn soft by her grandfather's thumb, and then by her own 3 generations of hands on the same small strip of cloth. And for the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest lifted. Life did not snap back into place all at once, the way it does in the easy stories. It came back the way real things come back, slowly and a little changed. Keiko returned to the dental office, and the dentist met her at the door himself, red-faced, and held it open for her, and never again spoke to her as though she were furniture. The accountant sent a check for the wages he'd cost her and a note he was too ashamed to sign. The elderly couple across town, who had never believed a word against her, simply welcomed her back with tea, the way they always had. But the deepest change was not in the jobs. It was in the way Keiko walked into a room now. She had spent her whole life making herself small enough to disappear. She did not do that anymore. People in town knew her name now, knew it as the name of a woman whose daughter had stood up for her, and Keiko had discovered, late in life, that it was possible to be seen and to be safe at the same time. In the spring, Hannah started teaching. It began small, almost by accident. A younger girl from her building who was being followed home by older kids, then her little brother, then a few of their friends, then half a dozen children whose parents had heard the story and wanted their kids to learn whatever it was the quiet. Tanaka girl knew. Daniel came too, on weekends to help. He had finally found a use for all those dusty histories, and he turned out to be a patient teacher of the things that lived in books, the philosophy beneath the technique. They would meet in the bare patch of courtyard behind the apartments after school. The grass worn down to a circle of earth not so different from her grandfather's backyard, and Hannah would teach them the way she had been taught. Not how to win trophies, not how to hurt people, how to read a body before it moves, how to breathe slow when their hearts wanted to race, how to take a stronger person's force and give it back to them as empty air, how to make themselves not into the strongest in the room. There would always be someone stronger, but into people who simply could not be made small. And on the first day, before any of that, before a single stance, she made each of them kneel in the dirt and press a thumb against the frayed edge of the old gray belt. And she made them repeat the promise her grandfather had asked of her in a sunlit backyard all those years ago. To stand in front of those who cannot stand for themselves. And nothing else. One of the smallest children, a boy with a gap in his front teeth, asked her once why the belt was so old and ugly when you could buy a clean black one at any shop. Hana smiled and let him hold it, and she watched his small fingers find the worn soft center the way hers always did. Because a new belt only tells you what you've passed, she said. This one tells you who held it before you. That's worth more. Because that, in the end, was the secret her grandfather had really left her, not in the way her hands could move, but in the worn cloth itself, passed from one quiet hand to the next, carrying its promise forward like a flame cupped against the wind. True strength was never about how hard you could strike. It was about how steadily you could stand in the light, with nothing in your hands but the truth, in front of someone who needed you to stand there. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you are doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me. If this story moved you, write honor in the comments. This is a story from Underdog Dojo.